Hello, I'm John Egan, and this is Photography Workshops Online. So let's start looking at exposure, what it is and how it's achieved. Exposure really is getting the right amount of light onto the sensor to make the best photograph. If there is sufficient light, you get a perfectly exposed photograph. But if it's too dark, the photograph is muddy or underexposed. And if there's way too much light, it becomes really washed out, and so all the detail disappears. So the aim of the game is to get correct exposure. Now, most cameras today have an automatic light meter built in, and if you leave your camera on A, you will get 9 times out of 10 a perfectly exposed photograph, because the camera balances the effect of the aperture, the effect of the shutter speed, and the effect of the ISO. Our aim is to take control of one or all of these, to be creative and still get a really good exposure. Shutter speed is expressed in seconds or parts of a second. Thousandth of a second, 1/500th of a second, a 2/50th of a second, or a 30th of a second, and so forth. Aperture is expressed in f numbers: f16, f11, f8, f5.6, etc. The hardest thing to grasp is the bigger the number, the smaller the hole, and so less light gets through. A good way is to think of these numbers as fractions. 1/16 is much smaller than an eighth or a quarter. So now that we know how each one works, that's the shutter speed and the aperture, let's look at how they relate to each other. Imagine you have 2 identical buckets being filled with water, one from a small tap, the other from a larger tap. The first takes much longer to fill. Now substitute water for light. The bucket is the amount of light needed for correct exposure. The tap is the aperture, and the time it takes to fill the bucket is the shutter speed. You can see this relationship actually working in the camera. As the shutter speed slows, the aperture gets smaller. The reverse is true. As the shutter speed gets faster, the aperture opens up to allow more light to enter. Let's look at the shutter speed first, or the shutter itself. The shutter is a device that's there to block the light out until we want light to reach the sensor. And then it opens and closes very quickly. It can operate in amazingly fast speeds, up to 2,000, 3,000, 5,000th of a second. You can't see the shutter move at that speed. Or it can go as long as sometimes 30 of a second, or you can leave it open for even longer. The shutter speed is infinitely variable, and it creates the feeling of motion. If we want to stop motion, if we want to stop movement, we use a high shutter speed, 1,000, 2,000th of a second, and that freezes the action. A slow shutter speed allows motion to sometimes blur, which can be really creative as well. The high shutter speed used in these photos demonstrates how effective it is in stopping motion. Great for all sports and fast moving objects.
A slow shutter speed can give you a dreamy effect to water. You will need to support the camera really well. A tripod is ideal. It's up to your creative mind to apply the skill to other situations.
Always put the strap over your head, otherwise you may drop the camera and the strap will save you a lot of money. The other thing you're holding the camera is to support the camera. The left hand should be underneath the lens and the right hand should hold the body of the camera ready to press the shutter. Holding it with the left hand, you can also zoom by just using these two fingers. You don't have to let go of the camera. If you try to do that with the camera held like this, you're going to lose it. The whole thing moves. The third thing, most important thing, is don't stab the shutter. Squeeze the shutter. And use the viewfinder. Don't use the back viewer, use the viewfinder. Put your elbows into your body, put the camera up to your head like such, and just squeeze the shutter. This is particularly important for slow shutter speeds. On higher shutter speeds, maybe. There is a rule of thumb that says that if you're using a lens and you've got it, for example, at 200 millimeters long, we'll talk about focal length later, then 200th of a second is the lowest you should go. The other one, 500th of a second. Some people say 1,000th of a second, but you certainly follow up the focal length of your camera. Keep your camera still and your photos will be so much better. Now, I've set it on the 30th of a second, which is way back, very slow, and I'm going to now lock him into the middle of my viewfinder, and once I've got him in the middle of my viewfinder, I'm going to follow him, but I am not going to stop the movement of the camera. I'm going to release the shutter a couple of times, but I'm not going to stop the movement of the camera. So Ken, if you would. Now Ken's coming through and I'm taking the photographs and I'm not stopping the movement. I've got him exactly in the frame where he should be. Okay, now you'll see the result.
Earlier in the workshops we mentioned that aperture was the variable hole set in the lens to reduce or increase how much light could pass through. The smaller the number, the larger the hole. We asked you to consider them as fractions, which in fact they are, but that explanation is a bit beyond the scope of this tutorial. Aperture affects depth of field as well as exposure. Depth of field is the part of an image that is in focus in front or behind the subject. As seen from these shots taken on a 50mm lens focused on the second rose from the camera, the smaller the aperture, the greater the depth of field. So f22 gives great focus all round. f5.6 is okay, but both the front and the very rear roses are going out of focus. And finally at f2.8, just the roses which were the subject are in focus, the rest have fallen out completely. So how and when do we use this depth of field? In the example here of the petunia, notice that the hose and tap connections are highly visible, distracting from the overall image. By increasing the aperture as far as I could, the background was softened considerably and the flower petals stand out with no distractions. Here are some more examples of using the aperture to get rid of distracting backgrounds. When we're shooting landscapes, we use a smaller aperture to get a longer depth of field so that everything is in focus. If you're not sure where to focus, pick a point that is about a third of the way into the scene and select the smallest aperture that you can. I've left the ISO to last as it links the other two and complements them. It is the measure of the sensitivity of the sensor to light. You can adjust the ISO to suit the light levels, increasing it for low light level or reducing it in high light conditions. Some people leave it on auto, which automatically matches the sensitivity with the circumstances. Really high sensitivity can result in poor image quality, but that's not such a big issue today. Electronics have improved so much. Under some circumstances, your camera cannot get the correct exposure. Either there is too much light or too little. Imagine here that you are doing sports photos and you need a high shutter speed, but the lens will only open up to 3.5, that's its maximum aperture. As you increase the shutter speed, the aperture will begin to blink, alerting you to a problem. The solution here is to increase the ISO so that the system needs less light, or reduce the shutter speed until the flashing stops. Or you might be trying to blur a waterfall in bright light. You want a slow shutter speed, but the aperture cannot close down enough to limit the light. In this case, reduce the ISO so the system is less sensitive to light. Importantly, the shutter will still fire, so your exposure might be way off if you allow it to work with a blinking alert. Lenses are the most important piece of the puzzle. Good lenses are vital in getting a good image, and you really do get what you pay for with them. My advice is to get the best lenses you can afford before spending money on that better camera body. Sure, it's important too, but your lenses will be with you long after the body is obsolete. The focal length of a lens is expressed in millimeters. The larger the number, the smaller the angle of view. Telephoto lenses bring distant objects closer. Wide-angle lenses cover an expansive part of the scene, and standard lenses are approximately the same view as the human eye. Prime lenses have only one focal length, whereas zoom lenses cover a wide. Here the angle of view is illustrated for various focal lengths, and then we see the actual image that appears on the viewfinder.
In this workshop, we've discussed the shutter and how it affects the movement in your image. We've discussed aperture and how that affects the depth. And we've also looked at ISO and how it can change exposure. We've looked at lenses and the effect that focal length can have on your photographs. All of the basics, all of them will make you well able to get the photographs that you've always wanted. This is Photography Workshops Online, and I am John Egan.